Cockle. I'm the Tier 2 Incentive Program Manager. We're here today to talk about the funding distribution for the Tier 2 Incentive Program. We are recording today, and we will post this along with any materials, any links, as quickly as we can once we are done today. We are here with the Department of Commerce, where we strengthen communities. We provide a wide array of support, focusing on community and economic development across the state of Washington, work with local governments, tribes, businesses, and civic leaders throughout the state, things like housing and homelessness, infrastructure, broadband, crime victims, and public safety. There's a lot of a lot of great work that is done here at Commerce. We thank you all for being here today. Part of our team here, we're in the Clean Buildings unit within the Department of Commerce. Our managing director, Emily Salzberg. Down here on the left, we have the incentive program headed up by Josette Gates. Myself here doing Tier 2 incentive program. Brittany Wagner, she's our Tier 1 incentive programs, runs our Tier 1 incentive program as well as appliance standards. We have a vacant position we're hoping to fill soon. We also have our data team headed up by KJ Lee and Michael Stoneway. Our technical assistants, our tech team led by Luke Howard. We have Judy Darst, Donnie Westfall, and James Witherington. And then our program team, really education, outreach, headed up by Annalyn Bergen, Dylan Ackerman, and Jeff Rasmussen. They also have a vacant position they're looking to fill here soon, hopefully. Little bit of our agenda that we're gonna go over today. Some brief overview of our Tier 2 and how it relates to the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. We'll do an overview of the incentive program, just to be sure we're all kind of standing on the same ground, make sure folks know what we're here talking about. We'll get into the funding distribution survey, which we've put together, trying to get some feedback on how best to enhance these incentive funds. Then we'll get into kind of what's next, what's coming up, and some time for questions and comments. So we are here today to talk about the Tier 2 incentive program that is in relation to the Tier 2 buildings for the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. That is based on ASHRAE Standard 100. For Tier 2 buildings, those are buildings between 20 and 50,000 square feet, multi-family buildings over 20,000 square feet. This also applies to larger buildings, those Tier 1 buildings, which are over 50,000 square feet. Commerce was charged with doing the rulemaking, notifying building owners, as well as administering incentives and supporting mandatory compliance. Those basic requirements of compliance buildings are benchmarking, developing an energy management plan, as well as an operations and maintenance program. I think it's important to just kind of reiterate that there is no performance metric at this time with the Tier 2 basic requirements. That's different from Tier 1. But that is there. So we have our benchmarking, energy management plan, operations and maintenance program. That is our steps for compliance. In talking about benchmarking a little bit more specifically, you can do that by creating an account within Energy Star Portfolio Manager. You will need to, you can contact your utility providers to integrate your building energy data into Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And then you will get into, that will help you establish your weather normalized energy use intensity, kind of showing how much, what is your the energy use for your building, what does that look like? And then from there, you will identify your energy use intensity target. So what buildings of similar use and size, what their kind of what that average energy use intensity is. Then you can compare your weather normalized energy use intensity to the calculated energy use intensity target. That's kind of benchmarking uh, uh, in general. The other components of Tier 2 compliance are the energy management plan and the operations and maintenance program. These are both living documents, so they're going to change over time. The energy management plan describes a building's energy performance and typically consists of building energy metering and reporting, the energy use intensity reporting, energy efficiency measure implementation, operations and maintenance considerations, as well as communication responsibilities. The operations and maintenance program, again, also a living document. It's going to change over time, but it is there to ensure energy efficient operation and minimize failure of building systems and components throughout their service lives. You can read a little bit more description on that in Section 6, Normative Annex L of the Clean Building Performance Standard. It is a component of an energy management plan, and it lists inspection and maintenance requirements for specific systems and equipment, and also establishes responsibilities for individuals operating and maintaining the equipment, components, and their systems. As far as who is responsible for complying with the Tier 2 requirements, we have a couple roles. The building owner, that's an individual or entity possessing title to a building. In the event that the land is leased, the building owner is the entity possessing title to the building on the leased land. So that is our building owner. Another role we have is the qualified energy manager. This is an individual who is designated by the building owner, and they have 2 years of experience, including educational or professional experience with commercial building operations and or building energy management, in addition to successful completion of the Clean Buildings Tier 2 training program as specified by the AHJ, the Department of Commerce. The qualified energy manager also meets the definition of qualified person. So once we get to that point, we've got our benchmarking, we have our energy management plan, we have our operations and maintenance program. On Commerce's side, we are currently in the process of identifying Tier 2 buildings. For Tier 1 buildings, we believe we've identified around like 8,300 buildings or so, but at this point, we do not have an estimate of Tier 2 buildings or their count. Our data team is working hard on getting that information, making sure it's accurate, and getting it uploaded into the Clean Buildings portal, which is where these compliance documents and the incentive application will be submitted and will be applied for. Yeah, after identifying those Tier 2 buildings, they'll be added to the portal, and the goal is that by July 1st, 2025, Commerce will provide Tier 2 building owners with notifications of the requirements and the ability to access the Clean Building portal that will give you things like your building ID number and instructions on how to access the portal. Once we get to that point, folks will be able to submit their documentation and apply for the incentive program. So with that being said, we're not quite to that point yet. So, what can you do now before notification? You can confirm your utilities participation in the incentive program. You can benchmark your building in the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and you can begin developing that energy management plan and operations and maintenance program. Have those documents ready. After notification, again, that's July 1st, 2025. You will be able to access the Clean Buildings portal. You'll be able to submit those compliance documents, and then you will be able to apply for Tier 2, excuse me, the Tier 2 incentive program. Moving into the Tier 2 incentive program, the overview of Tier 2, it incentivizes completion of reporting requirements. The incentive applications will be accepted from July 1st, 2025 through June 1st of 2030. The compliance documents themselves, I believe, need to be submitted before July 1st, 2027. But the incentive program does itself run through June 1st of 2030. Incentive funds are capped at 150 million total, and those are to be paid out by participating utilities. The base incentive was identified at 30 cents per gross square foot. And then there's also an opportunity to do an enhanced incentive, which is what we're here to talk about in a little bit more detail today. As far as eligibility, buildings eligible to apply for the Tier 2 incentive program are covered commercial buildings as defined by the Clean Buildings Performance Standard between 20 and 50,000 square feet of gross floor area, as well as multifamily residential buildings with greater than 20,000 square feet of gross floor area. The buildings must demonstrate compliance with the applicable benchmarking, energy management, and operations and maintenance planning requirements. And the buildings must be served by at least one electric utility, gas company, or thermal energy company that is participating in the Clean Buildings Incentive Program. As far as the role of the utilities, you'll submit your documents, your compliance documents to Commerce. You'll submit your incentive application to Commerce, and we will calculate the incentive for each participating utility. And that incentive, the base payment is set at 30 cents per gross square foot. Sorry, 30 cents of square foot of gross floor area, excluding parking unconditioned or semi-conditioned spaces. And then, again, we're here to talk about that enhanced incentive payment, what an increase beyond that may look like. Incentive calculations and payments are based on the proportion of energy use by fuel type. So again, we have our compliance documents are submitted. You submit your application. Commerce will review, approve, and calculate that incentive amount. Then the utility will go in and they will approve that amount and make that payment to the building owner. This kind of brings us to a point of, we're working with these Tier 2 buildings. We don't have the building stock identified yet. We're trying to understand just how many Tier 2 buildings are. I think it's safe to assume there will be more than Tier 1 buildings. But that kind of takes us to this issue of kind of trying to identify the incentive program scale, and Josette is going to speak on that briefly. Thanks, Josette.
Great. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here today. We're very excited to talk about the Tier 2 incentives. Again, my name is Josette Gates. I'm the incentive program lead here with Commerce. So I just wanted to walk through a bit of a thought experiment today and talk about what is the scale of the Tier 2 incentive program. As you heard previously in the presentation, this program has $150 million of fundings available for incentives. The good news is that was more than the Tier 1 building incentive allocation, but we still don't know yet exactly how many Tier 2 buildings there are in the state. So let's look at how much incentives could be and how many buildings we could assist. Buildings range in size in this category, which is Tier 2, and since the incentive is paid based on the square footage of the building at 30 cents per square foot, the incentives are going to vary, of course. So this slide just shows that the payments can range from about $6,000 on a smaller 20,000 square foot building. The incentive on a 35,000 square foot building would be about 10,500. And then on the larger size buildings, the incentive could be up to $15,000 for a 50,000 square foot building. And these are just examples. So given this style of incentive, the number of buildings we'll be able to assist will depend on the distribution of the different sizes of buildings in our state and who chooses to apply to the program. So Commerce is really looking at taking action to be able to process this potentially large volume of applications that we'll get for the program. So you can kind of see that we could get up to maybe 14,000 applications for tier two, for example, if every building was medium sized. So just keep this in mind. I hope this provides some context for you about how much the incentives could be and then how many buildings we could serve. And keep this in mind as you're taking the survey later for us at the end. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Josette. Yeah, I think this just kind of portrays, we're really, we want to ensure that funds will be available, across the state for the large number of building owners that could possibly apply to this incentive program. Where'd I go here? Sorry. So in talking about an enhanced incentive, those numbers that Josette shared, were based on that base incentive amount of 30 cents per square foot. In substitute Senate Bill 5722, it states the department is authorized to implement a tiered incentive structure for multifamily building owners willing to commit to anti-displacement provisions. So that's one stepping stone we have to stand on. And then additionally, more recently, House Bill 1976 states the department may provide incentives greater than the base incentive payment for upgrading tier two buildings. So, we have a little bit of leeway as far as how we structure an enhanced incentive payment, but I think some of the conversations that we've been having here within Commerce are the requirements for compliance are not as stringent as they are for the tier one incentive program. So we want to be able to provide an enhanced incentive, but we are trying to define, what might be too much of an enhancement to provide, in relation to the cost to building owners of compliance. So some of the funding distribution items that we are keeping under consideration, commitment to implementing energy efficiency upgrades. There's nothing that necessarily says that an incentive payment um, needs to be spent on energy efficiency upgrades. On that base incentive payment needs to be spent on energy efficiency upgrades. So a building owner, if they have their benchmarking already done, they have energy management plans, operation maintenance programs as just kind of standard operating procedure. They can submit their documentation and they can get their incentive funds. No problem. That's compliance, and they get their documentation. For some building owners, that is not going to be the reality for them. It's going to be a lot more time. It's going to be a lot more work. The cost is going to be a lot higher. So, in kind of having these conversations, we're trying to better understand, where to find that balance. We also want to, recognize that, there's less access to, networks of qualified individuals in rural and tribal communities. We want to recognize the commitment that multifamily affordable housing has to supporting individuals in the state of Washington. As well as the small businesses in the state of Washington. I think in some of our research, there's a lot of the small businesses in the state of Washington don't necessarily own the building where they are working. So, how much of an issue is that? And how can we provide any support there with this incentive program? And then also, wanting to take a look at high energy users. If there's a building that is, 15, 25, 35, if their energy use intensity is, 15, 25, 35 above their target, they are most likely going to need to be doing some investments into their building in the near future, so is there any way that these incentives can support that, and what may be appropriate for that? So to that end, we've developed a survey, and Jeff, if you want to put a link in the chat there for folks, if you haven't already. We put this together to try and get a little bit more information from folks, just kind of as far as, who, not only who is engaging with us, what your role is, but also kind of what is that of, building owners and energy auditors, qualified energy managers here in the state of Washington. So if folks want to take that survey now, if that works for folks, that's totally fine. It's live and it's open and you can do that. If folks want to take it afterwards, take it offline, that's fine. I don't think it shouldn't be too time intensive if you don't want it to be. But of course, if you would like to take some time with it, really put some thought into it, that is also more than welcome. So in developing the survey, it was a little bit more focused on our building owners, as well as the qualified energy managers. So there's four different kind of question tracks that can happen. So one is for building owners, operators, and managers. Another one for qualified energy managers. And then there's a third one for utility representatives, as well as a fourth one just kind of for other, if you don't necessarily fall into any of those categories. In starting out, we kind of just want to get a current state, what are those primary use types for buildings? Where are you located? And then trying to get an understanding of if anyone is complying as part of a campus or connected building. Again, the questions are going to be a little bit different for folks. So they'll change a little bit, but we're trying to get to kind of similar sorts of information. Um, the next section here, we're trying to get to kind of the current state of things. So for building owners, what types of activities have been completed, just trying to get an idea of how prepared folks are, if they've done benchmarking, if they have energy management plans ready, operations and maintenance programs ready, just to try to get a better idea of that. Also, just wanting to get a better idea of recent investments, and then an idea of who will be doing this work for who will be doing this work for building owners, if they're going to be doing that in-house, if they'll be doing that themselves, or if they're going to be contracting for that work. Wanted to try and get an idea of estimated costs for implementing all elements of the Tier 2 compliance, as well as folks' intent on, if they intend on applying for Tier 2 incentive funds, then some questions on the barriers for applying to the program. Um, on the qualified energy manager side, kind of wanting to get an idea of how many folks, how many building owners, qualified energy managers, energy auditors could be working with, or how many they see themselves working with, and then trying to get a better idea of costs that they will be uh, that are generally charged for certain activities, as far as operations and maintenance programs, energy management plans, and benchmarking. Um, from that point, we will get into questions about the enhanced incentive, and these are really addressed to everyone. So, trying to identify who should be prioritized, and how we should prioritize that funding. So, what should be considered when we're determining these enhanced incentive qualifications, is how do folks kind of rank that, trying to get an idea of uh, folks' priorities. There's highly impacted communities from as identified in the Washington Health Disparities Map, multifamily anti-displacement, small business anti-displacement, tribal sovereign nations, just kind of those considerations, or all of the above, if we should really just try and keep that an option for everyone. And then also trying to understand how to um, what should prioritize, like what mechanism should we kind of use in prioritizing those funds, if it's only focusing enhanced funds on anti-displacement, small business preservation, or if it's only focusing those funds, on environmental health concerns, or, if we should take a little bit more of a look at stacking incentives, so for folks in rural communities or tribal sovereign nations, if they also rank high on the Washington Health Disparities Map and also are willing to commit to anti-displacement for multifamily buildings or small businesses, like could we stack those incentives at a certain amount in as we're making these determinations. Additionally, trying to identify what kinds of support folks anticipate with applying to the incentive program, as well as complying with the Clean Building Performance Standard for Tier 2 buildings. Any additional resources that folks may be accessing, as well as additional funding they may be accessing. And then also trying to identify any additional feedback that folks may have, which they feel was not necessarily captured within those questions of the survey. I think I'll take a break there. If anybody has any questions about the survey at the moment that are in the chat, or if they wanted to come off of chat and ask about, like we have plenty of time.
There are some questions in the chat. I don't know that they're directly related to the survey. So do
Okay.
you want to hold those till the end, or just let me know when you're ready for those?
Yeah, no, let's hold those to the end. If anybody has any questions about the survey, or any feedback about the survey, if they wanted to come off of mute and offer those, or ask those questions, that would be fine at this time. Okay. So kind of what's next, as far as the Tier 2 incentive program planning, will determine the prioritization for the incentive funding. We are continue to develop the guidebook for applying to the program. We continue to develop resources, the energy management plan template, the operations and maintenance program template, as well as the qualified energy manager training. And then, we'll continue to communicate this program and the available support. Upcoming events, coming in October is the building owner focus. That will be a little bit more technical, on the technical side of things. So it'll be a little bit longer. It would greatly encourage building owners to participate in that one. If you have any questions, want to learn a little bit more about the program. Then in November, we'll have a utility provider focus. And then in December, finalizing the program. Hopefully we'll have the guidebook all wrapped up by then, so we can present on that. At least that's the goal, to present on that, walk through that at that time in December. You have available support. Many of the utilities have accelerator programs. There's the Smart Buildings Center, the help desk, Energy Star Portfolio Manager. They have lots of recorded and live trainings. The WCU Energy Program has EMP and O&M recorded webinars, which are also very informative. And then the Department of Commerce, we have lots of supports and resources listed on our website. So that being said, we'll get to questions and comments.
Okay, so I think we actually had the Q&A section open as well as some questions in the chat. So I'll take the charge of reading the ones in the chat, and then we'll hand it over to Jeff for the Q&A because I can't see those.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So the first one from Janet. Regarding high energy users, that is total energy used, not EUI. For example, a large building might be under its EUIT, but could have big energy reduction. And Janet, I'll also invite you to come off chat, or excuse me, come off mute.
Yeah, I don't. Is there anyone on the tech team that may be able to respond to that a little bit more?
I think it's a really good comment. You know, when you think about energy burden in the state, that's something also we like to think about is a larger building uses more energy and it could have more energy burden, right? Because it's in an area that has a higher utility cost. So really good comment. We'll definitely be considering how much energy the building is using per square feet and the intensity of the building. But for the purposes of tier 2, we're just looking at the benchmarking data that you have as part of complying for this program. So I hope that helps, but great comment.
Yeah, if I could just add, Josette, the purpose of the Washington Clean Buildings is to reduce, you know, carbon pollution actually is one of the stated purposes. And one of the things we found with the Tier 1 incentive program was we worked really hard to get our buildings energy efficient, but they still are heavy users. Like in universities, for example, we have large buildings. They are heavy users of energy. And we can cost effectively reduce that energy use in the large buildings, but we're not really it doesn't feel like the scale is quite right when you just consider EUIT. What the state wants to do is overall reduce energy pollution, as they state. So let's look at the biggest users, even if they are currently reasonable in their EUIT. So that's
great point. We're going to note that. Yeah, so there is definitely variability across the buildings and more opportunities for different buildings. So we'll note that. Thank you.
All right, next question from Brianna. Are these slides available after the presentation or can they be dropped in the chat? And Annalyn already took care of that and dropped them in the chat, but Derek will take care of sending out a more comprehensive message after this with kind of everything in one place.
Yeah, and we'll try to do some FAQ type of document as well for the questions.
Great. And then next question from Janet. Any guess at the pool of funds for enhanced incentives?
No, not at this point. I think we need to have a better idea of, just how many buildings we're talking about. And then that will, give us a little bit better of an idea of how we can structure that, as far as like how high we can go or what is too high. I think I think just in balancing the cost of compliance with trying to get as many funds to as many building owners, I think that is something that's a consideration that's at the forefront for me. But getting feedback from folks as far as what those priorities need to be, that's kind of where we're at right now. If that answers the question.
Yeah. Okay, from Sharon. Is this specifically for building size or property size? As in, if there are multiple buildings on the property that are all below 20,000 square feet, is this something we would need to comply with? Or is this about the cumulative square footage of buildings on a single property?
For the building size, as far as I understand it, it's limited to the building size itself.
Yeah, unless they're, combined by some sort of conditioned space. But I think that might have been some of the confusion when we identified the tier 1 buildings, because we did have to use parcel data. So I
Hmm.
think it got a little muddy for a lot of folks, but yeah, it is the building.
Yeah.
And Dylan, I think, went into a little more depth. Dylan, did you want to go into your explanation verbally? So you came on.
No, Brittany, I think you did a great job. If you have multiple unconnected buildings that are less than 20,000 square feet, they would not need to comply.
Great. So just scrolling through. Christine said it would be helpful to understand how the law is defining anti-displacement for our consideration. We will take note of that. Dolores said, is a building identified by having a separate address with organizations that have multiple buildings?
And Derek, can we go back to that anti-displacement? Can you just give an idea of what anti-displacement means?
Yeah, so the anti-displacement, our weatherization program has kind of similar, does similar work, and it would, I think at this point it would be, a certification that a building owner was not going to raise rent because of compliance with tier 2, uh, uh, the clean building performance standard for tier 2 buildings. So it would be, as far as implementing it, it would be a certification at this point, as far as I understand. So it's not raising rent on tenants due to complying with the clean building performance standard.
Like you're attesting that you won't evict some,
Yeah,
or this rent, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And that will be outlined in the guidebook. We intend to have, all of those very clearly stated out in the guidebook. So there will be plenty of opportunity for feedback on those as well before the program is finalized.
Great, thanks. So I'll just reiterate, since we kind of jumped back. Is the building identified by having a separate address with organizations that have multiple buildings? And that's Dolores. Are you asking how we're identifying each building as far as the notification process, Dolores? Can you elaborate?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, it's I think it might be the energy portal compliant the benchmarking. So whatever we do with our benchmark, that address is how it drives the gross square foot, right? So if the building, well, like we had of a school, and over time, the school and the church merged with the commons area. So we have a gas meter for our school yet, and a gas meter for the church. So there's 2 meters, so they have to be combined in aggregate for our benchmarking. So I think that's what drives it. It would be how the benchmarking is set up, correct?
As far as the building identification?
As far as, yeah, and ultimately incentive, because if the compliance is what you benchmark and what, that ultimately drives the EUI.
Mhm. The incentive itself would be calculated with the gross floor area. The benchmarking, that's part of compliance.
Yeah.
But once that the building size, is determined and verified, by the building owner, that's what we will use to determine to calculate that incentive amount.
Well, how will we be notified about that?
A notification will go out before July 1st of 2025.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're currently in the process of identifying those tier 2 buildings and have as accurate of data as possible. And then once we get to that point, we'll be able to send out those notifications. And that will come with your Clean Building ID, which will allow you to access the Clean Building portal. And from that point, you can kind of see the information that we've put in as far as gross floor area for that building, the information that we've identified. And if you have any corrections you need to make at that point, I believe you should be able to do that.
Hi, Derek, just
okay.
to add to that, Dolores, can you just confirm, you said it was a school and then you've expanded, is it you expanded the building or just the connection with the
What-
metering?
We used to have the two structures separate, and then we combined, we did remodeling and we opened up so that they're now all contiguous.
Okay, okay,
And so there's a legacy address to the school that was there from 1956. But in 2007, it became one building.
okay. It would be how you reported it then. We're gonna do our best to try to identify these buildings, but clearly, some of the information that we're gathering may be outdated and may not, the building owner and their, their representatives will have a better idea of what the actual square footage is. So it's gonna be based on that, reporting system. Judy wants
Okay.
to add a little more.
Yeah, so now understanding your configuration, this doesn't apply to you, Dolores, but the scenario, if you are, have two separate buildings and they're metered together and you're benchmarking them together, you do the whole square footage, it is possible that you could have a tier 1 building attached and connected through a meter with a tier 2 building, and the incentives would be the square footage of the buildings themselves. So the tier 2 building might be available for the tier 2 incentive, and the tier 1 building might be available for the tier 1 incentive. So it goes building by building for the incentives, but benchmarking does go together. Hopefully that helps.
But your situation, it's one contiguous building, so that square footage, it goes for all of that, and what you report is what we're gonna go off of.
Okay, that sounds correct.
And then just to go through the question that was in the Q&A, it says, is there a possibility that the 150 million available will be increased?
I haven't heard of any conversations of that being increased at this point. I don't know if anybody else has heard anything.
So that $150 million was allocated through the legislature. So every year it could change with any legislative session. So we haven't heard of anything. I haven't heard of anything, but anything can be proposed in the future.
And can I clarify on that 150 million that Commerce is not paying the incentive? The incentive is paid by utilities to the account holder.
Thank you, Annika. Yeah, that is true. It's not these are incentives to be paid by the utility. So it's not funds coming to Commerce or through Commerce. We're reviewing compliance documentation, calculating incentive amounts, and then verifying that with the utilities who will make that payment to the building owner.
All right, good to move to the next question?
Mhm.
Okay, so if your building serves both rural and non-rural communities, should you mark rural on the application? That's from Kelsey.
There, we still have to develop that part of the incentive application. It's not going to impact any compliance documentation or submitting in there. I think it would be more on not necessarily who you serve, who the building serves, but where the building is located. And I'm thinking along those lines, I'm thinking more of, how do we implement, this kind of, how do we implement this program, in getting these funds and calculating these funds for payment. So it would be less who you serve and more where that building is located.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Bill asked, will BES have a contract for a qualified auditor, and when is this training going to happen?
I'm just Annalyn, or do
Yes,
you have any?
hopefully we can get that up and running the beginning of next year.
Great. Veronica asked, are multifamily homes built in 2016 required to comply?
Yes. I mean, all buildings, depending on their building size, if for tier 2, between 20,000, or well, I guess for multifamily, anything over 20,000 square feet, is required to comply. So, if that building is less than 20,000 square feet, it does not have to comply. But if it is a multifamily building larger than 20,000 square feet, regardless of when it was constructed, it will have to comply.
Thank you. Roy asks, what triggers being able to apply for tier 2 incentive applications without having a compliance target for each building? And then I'm actually not sure who M. Arndt is, but they essentially answered submitting your benchmarking EMP and O&M plans to us.
Thanks, Michael. Michael's correct.
Thank you, Michael.
And then we have some helpful links. Grant asked, will owners be able to submit for the tier 2 incentives across their portfolio of tier 2 buildings, for example, rather than building by building?
I mean, we would have to look on if that is a possibility. I think the way things are structured right now, it would need to be building by building. But I think that, that's something that we could look at. But as I understand it, it would need to be building by building.
Okay, and then Grant asked, for the energy audits incentive for public buildings, is there any update on award of funds for the applicants who have already submitted? No, we can put something out hopefully soon about that. We've just been trying to configure, updating the RFA and getting the panel convened to go through those. And then the next step will be sending out a notification to the applicants and starting the drafting of the interagency agreement contracting. So soon, Grant. Matt asked, said this was very helpful. Jennifer asks, regarding the Washington Health Disparities response in this survey, what would be considered a high score? The scoring system range is 1 to 10, 10 being the highest.
Yeah, we've in other in RFAs or in funding programs, other funding programs that Commerce has used this as kind of a qualification. It's been, that scores a 9 or a 10 on the Washington Health Disparities map. It hasn't been determined at this point, how high that would be, but I think historically the precedent within Commerce has been set at 9 or 10, scoring 9 or 10 on the health disparities map.
Okay, from Bill, FYI, we noticed on your tier 1 rollout data from the Department of Commerce sent to our local PUD, it appears outdated, citing buildings we have not owned for years. Unknown if the new building owner is getting proper notification.
you please email us those list of buildings so we can detach your ownership to it? And just to kind of clarify, with the building identification for tier 1, we got it from assessor data, and I think it was in 2020 and May. Some of the data can be as old as 2020. So if there were any kind of ownership change, a building sell, or anything like that, we wouldn't have that information. So if you could email us, if Jeff can put our email address, send us a list of those buildings, whether you send it, give us the parcel number, the address, and your business name, we can certainly detach your ownership.
Thank you. Jordan asked, if a building is served by separate electric and gas utilities, which utility will handle the incentive, assuming they're both participating utilities?
Those they would receive two payments, is that correct? One from gas and one from electric?
Let's follow up on this one at a later time.
Okay, Christine asked, the utilities are paying the incentive, but then getting a tax credit for the amount. So the funding is ultimately paid for by the state, correct?
That is how it is. Yeah, it is structured. They make the payment and then they get an equivalent, as I understand it, an equivalent tax rebate on their utility taxes.
Thank you. Stacy said, if we have a qualified utility, but also a utility that doesn't participate, the payment would be prorated based on that utility's percentage serving the building. What if the participating utility is natural gas and you decarbonize the tier 2 building?
That's a good one. There's so many nuances and specifics in a lot of these. Does anybody, can anybody answer to that one now, or should we follow up on that?
I think we can also follow up on this one kind of together with the last question too.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll follow up.
Brian said there is a gap of roughly 4 to 5 years between having targets set and having benchmarking compliance completed. It might be good to seek additional funding to support energy reduction efforts, perhaps based on EUI reduction, to take advantage of that time frame prior to targets being set. We lose momentum. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add on to that comment. I think it's good food for thought for our team for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things I'm really excited about the tier 2 program is just this data and this information, that we'll be gathering throughout this process. I think there's a lot of opportunity with this information that we'll have, to hopefully do a lot of good here in the state as far as energy efficiency and energy use.
Okay, Roy said, if you have combined a tier 1 building together with a tier 2 building as part of a campus, are we still able to pursue incentives for the tier 2 building?
Yeah, and I believe Judy touched on that earlier, that you would pursue your incentives for tier 1, and then you would also pursue incentives for tier 2 based on the gross floor area of the building.
Okay. And then Jeff added our email in. Bill said, FYI, we've noticed. Oh, I think somebody just went back and answered that question. So I think that's all that we have. Jeff, is there stuff in the Q&A that you can jump in and read aloud for us?
No, there was just the one in the Q&A that Arnalyn touched on earlier. So we don't have anything else in there right now.
Okay.
Right,
it looks
on
like
time.
we are at
Quick
time.
timing.
So yeah, we'll get those any other questions we weren't able to answer. We'll get those together in an FAQ document. We'll get those posted on the website and send those out to participants along with the materials and recording of the webinar. So thank you all so very much for attending. Again, if you have any questions, please do not do not hesitate to reach out. Feel free to reach out to us at any time. We appreciate questions and appreciate any feedback you may have. Thank you so much.